invented. If you like the person, then you start considering it too much, whereas if you don't.
Every single day, I dive deep into another wild story from Hollywood's golden age. The kind of moments that built legends people still can't stop obsessing over. If you want to keep these memories alive right here with me, hit that subscribe button now. It's totally free, but it means the world. Now, let's talk about something that left old-school Hollywood shaking. Cary Grant, the man everyone saw as the picture of class and charm, was hiding a side of himself that no one dared to speak about. Behind that perfect smile and tailored suits, there was a man full of contradictions, and the one to spill it all was none other than Lee Marvin. Lee Marvin, the tough silver screen cowboy from the Dirty Dozen, was feared across Hollywood. Known for being brutally honest and never sugarcoating anything, Marvin didn't care who he angered. Before his death, he decided to drop a bombshell, exposing secrets that had been buried for decades about Grant, the so-called model gentleman everyone once worshipped. According to Marvin, behind Grant's charming grin was a distant and cold figure. He claimed Grant had lived with Randolph Scott for 12 years, something that sparked endless whispers in old Hollywood. And Marvin didn't stop there. He called out several other arrogant leading men from that era, guys who had crossed him or carried themselves like untouchable gods of the screen. While Grant played the elegant gentleman, Marvin was the total opposite, rough, rugged, and marked by real scars from actual battlefields. He wasn't acting tough. He was tough. He carried the heavy shadow of war, the kind of pain that never fades. And those cracks in his soul made him one of the last real men of that brutal generation. After facing death head-on, Lee Marvin had zero tolerance for lies or fake faces in Hollywood.
In other words, he has all the demons in him, the Irish demons. And he's also intelligent. And when the script is written, etc., if there was ever a difficult scene, he'd always shoot it at the end of the day.
He saw right through the glitz, straight into the rotten foundation that kept the movie world standing. If anyone dared to lie, cheat, or bully someone on set, Marvin didn't just whisper about it. He exploded, breaking that fake peace everyone pretended to keep. One day during the filming of The Dirty Dozen, things got heated. Marvin spotted a producer pushing a stuntman to perform a life-threatening scene without proper safety gear. That was all it took. Marvin stormed onto the set, ripped off his gloves, and shouted at the top of his lungs, "No one dies for your profit." The whole place went silent. The crew froze. The producer turned bright red, and Marvin walked away without another word. Some couldn't stand him, but everyone respected him, or feared him. You just couldn't fool a man who had already looked death in the eye on real battlefields. But Marvin didn't stop there. He stirred up even more chaos when he publicly called out a big-name director who kept insulting actresses on set, while others stayed quiet. Marvin crushed his cigarette on the floor and said coldly, "Do that again and I'm gone, and half this cast goes with me." The message was loud and clear. In his later years, when his health began to fade, Marvin started writing, not a book for fame, but raw notes full of truth. He scribbled down memories of what made him angry, the people he saw destroyed by the ruthless machine of Hollywood, and the icons who shined bright on screen but hid deep scars off it. Over time, those scattered thoughts became a diary, not for revenge, but to finally tell what no one else dared to say. For Lee Marvin, truth wasn't a weapon. It was a heavy weight on his chest. He didn't write to attack anyone, but to finally let go of everything that had been eating him alive inside. Each line he wrote was like taking a breath after years of holding it in. When he finished, he locked that diary inside an iron chest by his bed and left a single note that read, "When I'm gone, let it defend itself." When Marvin passed away, most of Hollywood secretly sighed in relief. They thought the storm had finally cleared, that the most brutally honest man in the industry was gone for good. But those who knew about his secret diary, they couldn't sleep. They were terrified that one day Marvin's raw words would resurface, sharp, cold, and unapologetic, just like him. And then came the name that sent shivers across old Hollywood, Cary Grant. His name appeared in those pages like a ghost, shining and blurry at the same time, a beautiful lie that the industry had protected for decades. Marvin didn't hate Grant, not at all, but he never trusted that flawless gentleman image the studios sold to the world. He used to say, "The more a man is praised, the more I want to know what he's hiding." During those late months, Marvin wrote even more about Grant. Not with malice, but with the eyes of someone who had seen the cracks forming in the statue everyone else bowed to. He wanted to reveal what was real, not what was scripted. And then, decades later, in 2025, the impossible happened. Marvin's final diary was leaked to the world. Those trembling, yellowed pages started with chilling notes about Grant's private life, the same whispers that had floated through Hollywood for years. Marvin even quoted lines he'd read somewhere, words that made people realize the truth he carried all his life had finally found its way out. Cary Grant had publicly admitted that all his ex-wives accused him of being homosexual, a statement that only fueled the fire of old Hollywood gossip. Marvin's notes pointed to the same thing. Grant had lived with Randolph Scott for 12 long years, and the world just brushed it off as bachelor roommates. But the magazines didn't. Vanity Fair and other outlets splashed photos of them everywhere, adding mystery and glamour to a story no one dared to fully confirm. In Marvin's diary, though, the story ran much deeper. He wrote that Grant and Randolph Scott weren't just housemates, not by a long shot. He described quiet moments between them, eyes soft but guarded, standing too close for just friends, and the kind of heavy silence that only two people who truly cared about each other could share. To Marvin, there was no confusion. Their connection was real, raw, and unspoken. He said they looked at each other like the whole world had vanished, and nothing existed but the two of them. Marvin believed this wasn't rumor or a fan's fantasy. It was the truth that Hollywood had buried under gold lights and red carpets. He even recalled one haunting night on the studio lot when he spotted Grant sitting alone under the yellow glow of the set lights. His face looked heartbreakingly beautiful, but his shoulders carried a sadness too heavy to hide. Marvin remembered Grant saying he had never been allowed to live as the man he truly was. Marvin didn't record every word of that talk, just the pieces that cut deep enough to never forget. He wrote about Grant's trembling hands when he mentioned Scott, and the hollow look in his eyes that said more than words ever could. From that moment, Marvin knew. He had seen the truth Hollywood never wanted told. Cary Grant had spent his entire life hiding behind that perfect smile. During a lunch break on set, Marvin recalled how Grant would laugh lightly with the crew, charming everyone with his warmth. But as soon as they walked away, his face would drop, just for a second, revealing the weight of something deeply buried inside. Marvin always said, "A man only acts like that when he's guarding a truth too heavy to show." Marvin remembered the infamous 1980 moment when Chevy Chase made a crude joke about Grant on television, calling him homo. That single word hit like a punch. Marvin described Grant's reaction. His jaw tightened, eyes flashing with a mix of anger and pain. It wasn't about pride. It was about years of being forced to play a role Hollywood demanded from him. The flawless gentleman who couldn't afford to be real. Grant's fierce response spoke volumes. He sued Chase immediately and settled the case out of court, not for revenge, but to defend his dignity and his right to live on his own terms. Marvin's notes painted Grant as a man torn in two, fragile because of what he feared people would see, but strong for how he fought to protect the little privacy he still had. Every smile, every polite gesture, every carefully chosen word, to Marvin, it all looked like a mask covering something tragic. He saw through it all, reading the pain behind Grant's charm. Marvin wrote that beyond Randolph Scott, Grant often showed a kind of magnetic charm toward other men around him. Not in a crude way, but almost like he needed connection, affection, attention. It wasn't just friendliness. It was the quiet, desperate behavior of a man craving to be seen for who he really was, in a world that never allowed it. Marvin described Grant's charm as something he couldn't possibly hide. It slipped out in every glance, every quiet smile, every word he spoke. His presence filled a room without effort, smooth and natural, as if he was born to draw people in. Marvin wrote that Grant never needed flashy moves or dramatic gestures. Just walking into a space made everyone stop and look. With younger actors or new faces, he was always kind and respectful, yet there was something magnetic about him that no one could explain. To Marvin, this wasn't for show. It was part of who Grant truly was. Grant had a way of making people feel seen, like they mattered, even in a crowded room. But nobody ever dared to say what they noticed out loud. In his diary, Marvin confessed, "I saw it clearly," though he didn't write any final conclusion. Those pages opened a window into the life of a man trapped by the role the world forced him to play, an image too perfect to ever escape. Marvin believed that Grant's inner pain, his lifelong need for control, and even his emotional distance all came from his childhood. Born in Bristol, England as Archibald Leach, Grant came from a rough working-class family. His father drank too much and eventually abandoned the family to live with another woman. Marvin said he could still see that wound in Grant's eyes, the look of someone who had been left behind too soon. And then came the heartbreak that haunted him forever. When Grant was just 9, his mother Elsie was sent away to a mental institution. He was told she had died. For years, he grew up believing she was gone, and that lie shaped his entire life. Marvin wrote that Grant once said he'd lived his whole life not knowing where she was, and that pain followed him like a ghost. At 30, Grant finally discovered the truth and brought his mother home, but their bond never fully healed. Too many silent years, too many unspoken words. Marvin believed that this early trauma drove Grant to build a perfect image of control and charm, marrying not for love, but to protect his privacy, keep the press quiet, and hold together a life that always felt one step away from unraveling. According to Marvin, every one of Cary Grant's marriages seemed like a carefully placed piece in a plan to keep that flawless gentleman image shining just the way Hollywood and audiences wanted it. His life looked perfect from the outside, but Marvin's notes painted a far messier truth beneath the tuxedos and camera lights. In his first marriage to Virginia Cherrill, things were far from glamorous. She accused him of being controlling and harsh. Then came Barbara Hutton, the heiress who thought Grant only wanted her money. Later, Betsy Drake, who stood by him through years of chaos, witnessed his intense obsession with Sophia Loren. And with Diane Cannon, the fights were explosive, full of shouting and pain. Some even called him violent, but Marvin saw something deeper. He wrote, "Cary never hurt anyone out of malice. He did it because he didn't know how to love, didn't know how to forgive himself." That single line hit hard. One of Marvin's longest diary entries explored what he called Cary Grant's inner war. He broke it down like a soldier analyzing a battlefield, explaining how Grant's perfectionism and fear of losing control ruled every part of his life. Marvin recalled the filming of The Awful Truth, where director Leo McCarey loved to improvise. That chaos drove Grant crazy. Marvin wrote, "He couldn't handle disorder. People who fear losing control usually do so because something inside them has already collapsed, and no one ever noticed." These words weren't cruel. They came from deep compassion, from a man who had watched too many others destroy themselves under the pressure of their own image. Because of all the pain bottled up inside him, Grant turned to something unusual for relief: LSD. Marvin revealed that Grant used it over 100 times, calling it both a weapon and a medicine. It became his way to strip off the mask, to find what he called the false inside himself. "At last," Grant once said, "I am close to happiness, stripping away the false." But even that came with a price. He sometimes used it while working, clashing with co-stars. He couldn't stand Joan Fontaine, calling her a fathead, and thought Mae West was far too seductive. Marvin's diary showed it all: the brilliance, the chaos, and the breaking point of a man trying to fix himself while the whole world watched. Marvin revealed that Cary Grant carefully avoided working with directors like Michael Curtis and Billy Wilder because he was terrified of cracking the perfect image he'd spent his entire life building. He didn't want anyone to see the man behind the mask. Marvin wrote, "Hollywood is not a place to live truthfully. Cary knew that early. Every sharp remark, every cold reaction wasn't cruelty. It was defense. It was how Grant protected himself from a world that demanded perfection at every turn. On the final page of his diary, Marvin's words read like a confession. "I do not hate Grant," he wrote. "I only saw clearly what he tried to hide. I saw the fragility in every smile, the heavy stone he carried just to satisfy a world that could never accept the real man." Then, almost as if he was speaking directly to whoever would one day read his words, Marvin added, "Sometimes truth isn't meant to expose someone. It's meant to set them free." But here's the thing. Cary Grant wasn't the only one Marvin wrote about. His diary listed several other stars he couldn't stand, people who wore the shiny armor of fame but couldn't hide their true nature from him. At the top of that list was director Sam Peckinpah. Marvin had originally been invited to star in The Wild Bunch back in 1960, a movie that seemed made for his rough, raw style. But from day one, Marvin and Peckinpah clashed hard. They fought over everything: the script, the schedule, the violence, and even how much freedom the actors should have. Peckinpah was known for being wild, unpredictable, and often drunk, and Marvin had no patience for that. He despised being controlled by anyone, especially a man like Peckinpah. Eventually, Marvin stormed off the project, calling him crazy and swearing he'd never work with him again. Even Robert Ryan, Marvin's longtime friend who stayed on the set, couldn't stand Peckinpah either. Marvin wrote, "I couldn't stand that guy, not for lack of talent, but because of how he made people lose control." He described working with Peckinpah like walking a tightrope in a storm. One wrong move, and you'd crash. To Marvin, Peckinpah's sets were chaos, full of pressure, alcohol, and crushed creativity. And just like everything else in his diary, he told it exactly as he saw it. No sugarcoating, no mercy, just the brutal truth. The second name that drove Lee Marvin absolutely wild was director Michael Ritchie. During the filming of Prime Cut in 1972, Marvin played a cold-blooded gangster in one of his darkest roles, hunting human flesh. It was the kind of movie that let him improvise and bring his raw energy to life. But Ritchie, he didn't want any of that. He forced Marvin to stick word for word to the script, leaving no room for the rough-edged creativity that made Marvin who he was. He hated it, said it felt like acting inside a cage. Then came the breaking point, a scene with Sissy Spacek that Marvin found downright absurd. He flat out refused to shoot it, calling it crude and unnecessary. In his diary, he didn't hold back. "The man understands nothing about acting. Everything feels stiff, fake, and foolish. I cannot work in this kind of environment." That was Marvin, always brutally honest, even when it cost him work. But Ritchie wasn't the only one who got under his skin. Marvin also had major issues with Burt Lancaster while filming The Professionals in 1966. Marvin admitted he wasn't perfect. He drank too much, showed up late, and sometimes slowed down production. But he saw it differently. To him, that chaos was part of being real. "I wasn't trying to be a perfect actor," he wrote. "I was trying to be a man, living truthfully." Lancaster, on the other hand, was polished, intense, and used to total control. Marvin said he had the eyes of a man who wanted to control the whole world, and that their egos were like fire and gasoline. During one tense mountain shoot, things almost turned violent. Marvin claimed, "Lancaster wanted to throw me off the mountain in anger." Everyone on set could feel it, the kind of tension that makes a crew freeze in place. Marvin later admitted he'd been drinking that day, saying, "I know I was drunk, but even then, he insisted Lancaster pushed him harder than anyone else ever had." It was classic Marvin, stubborn, flawed, but always real and never afraid to call out the truth, no matter how explosive it was. Marvin made it clear, this wasn't about lifelong grudges or hatred. It was about the pressure that came with being surrounded by Hollywood's biggest stars, people who wanted to control everything, down to the tiniest detail. He admitted that the clash with Burt Lancaster wasn't eternal. They eventually found a fragile peace. "We weren't friends," Marvin wrote, "but we understood each other, not because of affection, but because we were both too big, too stubborn to take a single step back." Looking back, Marvin realized this was a pattern that followed him everywhere in Hollywood, a never-ending struggle between powerful personalities. Every time he met another strong star, tension was guaranteed. He was the kind of man who wouldn't bow, and that made conflict almost inevitable. Then came another name that got under his skin, Gene Hackman. Marvin and Hackman worked together on Prime Cut, and while the movie was supposed to be Marvin's big moment,
for some reason it allowed you to experience it in its purity.
Hackman had just won an Oscar for The French Connection. The press couldn't stop praising him. Headlines, interviews, photo shoots, all about Hackman. Marvin, who was still the lead actor, suddenly felt like the spotlight had shifted. In his diary, he confessed, "I don't hate Hackman. No, but his sudden fame irritated me. I felt the light shining brighter on him, and I had to fight to prove I still belonged there." He described standing beside Hackman on set, watching how everyone's eyes followed the younger man. "He won the Oscar. Everyone loves him. And me, I have to prove I'm still the main man." Marvin admitted that what he felt wasn't pure jealousy. It was something deeper, a quiet kind of pain. "It wasn't hate," he wrote. "It was the helplessness of watching natural fame outshine experience and grit." Those words showed just how self-aware Marvin really was. His diary wasn't just about Hollywood gossip or grudges. It was a mirror, a way for him to analyze himself, his pride, and the brutal world that kept testing him over and over again. Hollywood, a place bursting with stars, power, and quiet jealousy, hiding behind polished smiles. The clashes with Burt Lancaster, the frustration of being overshadowed by Gene Hackman. All of it became proof of Lee Marvin's core philosophy: live truthfully, create authentically, and never let anyone dim your light. He didn't care about politics or popularity. He wanted honesty, even when it burned. To really understand why Marvin became so brutally straightforward, you have to look back at where it all started, his rough and restless life. Every legend begins somewhere, and Marvin's story was no exception. Born on February 19th, 1924 in New York City, Lee Marvin came from a wealthy yet chaotic home. His father, Lamont Waltman Marvin, was a World War I veteran and an advertising executive, strict, proud, and distant. His mother, Courtney Washington Davidge, came from a well-respected Virginia family with deep Southern roots. But privilege didn't protect Marvin from turmoil. Despite his family's status, his childhood was anything but peaceful. He was expelled from multiple schools for fights, bad behavior, and a temper no teacher could control. That wild energy, that restlessness, would later become the same raw power audiences loved to see on screen. Marvin didn't just act tough, he was tough. When World War II erupted, his life took a sharp turn. He joined the U.S. Marine Corps and served bravely in the Pacific Theater, facing real combat at Saipan, one of the war's bloodiest battles. There, he was shot and seriously wounded, both physically and mentally. Those injuries never left him. The scars ran deep, marks of courage, trauma, and survival all tangled together. Marvin carried that weight for the rest of his life. It shaped how he saw the world, raw, unscripted, and unforgiving. He had stared straight at death, and that changed everything. When he came back to Hollywood, he didn't play heroes. He was the man who had lived through war, pain, and truth. And that's what made his performances hit harder than anyone else's, because every glare, every growl, every word came from a man who had already walked through fire. There was a realism in Lee Marvin that no one could fake. Not in Hollywood, not anywhere. After the war, he was awarded the Purple Heart for his bravery and sacrifice. But when he came back home, the path wasn't clear. He drifted for a while, trying to figure out who he was after surviving the chaos of battle. For a time, he even worked as a plumber's assistant, a far cry from the bright lights that would one day define his life. Eventually, he found his way onto small theater stages in upstate New York, where acting seemed to come to him like instinct. That booming, gravelly voice and his commanding presence drew people in instantly. Even when he played nameless soldiers or background villains, he had something others didn't. Authenticity. You couldn't teach that. Marvin didn't have to act tough because he was tough. Every scar, every stare carried truth. In his early years, he took whatever roles he could get. gangsters, henchmen, hard-edged cops. But even in those small parts, Marvin stood out. Directors noticed, audiences leaned in, and soon his raw energy became impossible to ignore. His breakthrough came in the late 1950s and early 1960s with unforgettable roles in The Wild One, Bad Day at Black Rock, and The Big Heat. Each performance burned with intensity, leaving audiences both stunned and fascinated. But the moment that turned Marvin into a true Hollywood legend came in 1965 with Cat Ballou. Playing the drunken gunman Kid Shelleen and his evil twin, Marvin shocked everyone. He showed the world that behind that gruff exterior there was humor, irony, and a rare self-awareness. It was the perfect mix of fierce and funny, and it won him the Oscar for Best Actor. That performance wasn't just a victory, it was a declaration. Marvin had finally proven that he wasn't just another tough guy in a movie. He was a one-of-a-kind force who turned every flaw, every scar, and every truth into pure art on screen. Cold but funny, that was Lee Marvin's secret weapon. Beneath that rough, steel-hard exterior was a man who wasn't afraid to laugh at himself, even to the point of self-mockery. He could play a killer one moment and crack a joke the next, and somehow it always felt real. Through the 1960s and 1970s, Marvin became one of Hollywood's ultimate leading men, a symbol of raw masculinity mixed with surprising depth. He ruled the screen in classics like The Dirty Dozen, Point Blank, Hell in the Pacific, and Paint Your Wagon. Each role carried his unmistakable stamp, strong, layered, and brutally authentic. Whether he played a war-torn soldier, a cold-blooded avenger, or a reluctant anti-hero, Marvin brought a level of truth and power that few actors could ever reach. Working with directors like John Borman and Robert Aldrich showed just how versatile he really was. Marvin could be savage one minute, thoughtful the next, then unexpectedly funny or deeply emotional, all in the same performance. That mix of toughness and vulnerability became the essence of the Lee Marvin brand, a man who embodied every contradiction, fierce yet subtle, rugged yet heartbreakingly human. Off-screen, he was just as complex as the roles he played. Known for his brutal honesty, minimalist lifestyle, and iron-willed stubbornness, Marvin often clashed with Hollywood's polished, image-driven world. But those who truly knew him saw past the hard shell. They saw a man of intelligence, loyalty, and sharp wit. Behind that gravelly voice and piercing stare was someone who valued truth over charm and sincerity over fame. Yes, he could be rough around the edges, but that was part of his power. Marvin didn't fake anything, not in life, not on screen. And that unfiltered honesty earned him something even Hollywood couldn't manufacture: respect. Everyone might have feared his bluntness, but deep down, they admired the man who dared to be exactly who he was, no matter who was watching. Lee Marvin had a quiet, reflective side, one that didn't care for fame, fake smiles, or the endless vanity that ruled Hollywood. He often looked at the industry with cold amusement, seeing through its glittering surface straight into its emptiness. That's what made him unique. He wasn't just a movie star. He was a man who lived beyond the spotlight. Even in his later years, when his health began to fade from years of smoking and hard drinking, Marvin never truly slowed down. He stayed active in film, giving powerful performances in The Big Red One, 1980, and Gorky Park, 1983. Though his body showed the wear of time, his presence on screen never weakened. He was still a force of nature. There was something eternal in him, a mix of the wild, restless spirit of the Old West and the haunted soul of a war veteran. That combination made audiences feel both his strength and his hidden sorrow all at once. But off-screen, Marvin's life was just as dramatic as any role he ever played. His biggest scandal came with the explosive Marvin vs. Marvin case, one of Hollywood's most talked-about lawsuits of the 1970s. It all centered around his relationship with Michelle Triola, an actress and singer born in 1932. The two lived together in Malibu from 1965 to 1970, sharing a life that looked to the public like a real marriage, though they were never legally wed. Michelle gave up her career to take care of him, cooking, managing the home, and supporting Marvin's chaotic life, all while believing his promise of lifelong financial support. But when the relationship fell apart, she took him to court, demanding $1.8 million, half of what he had earned during their years together, plus $100,000 in additional support. The case shook Hollywood. It wasn't just gossip. It changed how the world looked at relationships in the entertainment business. Marvin, who had lived his whole life defying the rules, suddenly found himself caught in a legal storm that tested his pride, his privacy, and the tough image he'd built for decades. The Marvin v. Marvin case didn't just shake Hollywood. It was U.S. law. The lawsuit introduced the concept of palimony, or financial support between unmarried partners, a groundbreaking idea at the time. The trial dragged on for 11 long weeks and turned into a full-blown Hollywood spectacle. Big names like Valerie Harper even testified, revealing that Michelle Triola had never achieved musical success before living with Marvin. In court, Michelle claimed that Marvin had promised to take care of her forever, but Marvin flatly denied it, saying it was nothing more than a joke, just words tossed around in the heat of love and chaos. The case took another twist when accusations of infidelity surfaced. Michelle admitted to an affair with a photographer in 1969, which Marvin's lawyer, Marvin Mitchelson, used to argue that there was no solid commitment between them. He claimed the entire agreement was only an oral contract. The California Supreme Court made history in 1976 by upholding the principle behind that claim, opening the door for over 1,000 similar lawsuits that followed. In the end, Judge Arthur K. Marshall rejected Michelle's request to divide Marvin's property, but ordered him to pay $104,000, the equivalent of 2 years' salary for a top singer at the time, to help her rebuild her career. Marvin called the ruling a complete victory. But Michelle and her lawyer saw it differently. To them, it was proof that the law had finally recognized the rights of unmarried partners. Afterward, Marvin reportedly said, "Everyone lies, including me." That single line summed him up perfectly. Brutally honest, self-aware, and unafraid to face his own flaws. The scandal rocked his reputation, but also pushed him back into the spotlight. He became known not only as a Hollywood rebel, but as the man behind one of the most famous love and law dramas in American history. Ironically, the same storm that tried to ruin him ended up reviving his fame. Michelle Triola passed away in 2009, but Marvin vs. Marvin is still studied in law schools as a cornerstone case on cohabitation and relationship rights. Meanwhile, Lee Marvin moved on with life, marrying twice, each union reflecting a different version of the man he had become. His first marriage, to Betty Ebeling in 1952, began during his struggling years when he was just another young actor hustling through small TV gigs, still miles away from becoming the Hollywood legend he would one day be. In his early years, Lee Marvin juggled low-budget films and TV gigs just to make ends meet. Through it all, his first wife, Betty Ebeling, stayed by his side, calm, steady, and full of warmth. She held the family together through years of uncertainty, raising their 4 children while Marvin clawed his way up in Hollywood. But as his fame exploded, so did the pressures. Endless filming schedules, long separations, and his heavy drinking began to take their toll. The same stubbornness and fire that made him powerful on screen made living with him exhausting off it. After 15 years, the strain became too much. The two separated and finalized their divorce in 1967. Still, Betty never truly disappeared from Marvin's life. She remained the one person who fully understood his complicated nature, and their children stayed at the center of his heart, no matter what success or chaos came his way. 3 years later, in 1970, Marvin married Pamela Feely, the woman who had quietly stood by him for years before they made it official. By then, Marvin wasn't just another working actor, he was a Hollywood heavyweight. Pamela, elegant, smart, and fiercely independent, brought a sense of balance he had long been missing. She gave him something rare, peace. Despite his fiery temper and old drinking habits, Marvin deeply loved Pamela. She remained loyal through every storm, through every tabloid headline, and through every health scare. Together, they built a quieter life, moving from Tucson, Arizona to Mount Kisco, New York, before finally settling in Los Angeles. During those years, Marvin slowed his acting pace, but his presence never faded. He became a living symbol of what Hollywood once was, rugged, real, and unfiltered. Then, in December 1986, everything changed. Marvin's health took a sharp downturn when he was hospitalized for more than 2 weeks. The cause was coccidioidomycosis, better known as valley fever, a serious lung infection caused by spores common in the dry deserts of the American Southwest, especially in California and Arizona, places Marvin had called home for much of his life. The illness left him weakened, but his legend and that fierce, untamed spirit remained unshaken. For most people, valley fever brings nothing more than mild flu-like symptoms. But for Lee Marvin, whose body had already been worn down by years of smoking, drinking, and physical strain, it turned into something far more dangerous. The infection attacked his lungs, already damaged from decades of abuse, and soon developed into a severe respiratory illness that made every breath a battle. Doctors prescribed steroids to ease the inflammation, but the treatment came with heavy risks for a man in his fragile state. Before long, the side effects hit hard. Marvin suffered a devastating bowel rupture, a life-threatening complication that forced surgeons to remove part of his colon in an emergency operation. The procedure left him weak, in constant pain, and facing a slow, grueling recovery. For a man who had once faced bullets on the battlefield and performed his own dangerous stunts on screen, being trapped in a hospital bed was a cruel twist of fate. Friends and family who came to visit were shaken. The once towering figure, the man with the booming voice and unstoppable energy, was now thin, hunched, and pale. His voice had turned hoarse and quiet, but the spark in his eyes never faded. Even as his body failed him, his spirit refused to break. Despite the pain, Marvin never complained, never gave in. He faced this final test the same way he faced everything else in life, with grit, pride, and quiet defiance. His loved ones said that even in his weakest moments, there was still something unshakable about him. Every gesture, every glance carried that same strength that had defined him on screen and in life. To the very end, Lee Marvin remained the man he had always been, fearless, dignified, and unwilling to let the world see him as anything less than himself. Even as his health declined, those close to Lee Marvin said he never lost that sharp humor or fierce independence that defined him. His body may have slowed down, but his spirit never surrendered. On August 29, 1987, Marvin passed away from a heart attack at just 63 years old. His death marked the end of a Hollywood era, a time when leading men were expected to be raw, rugged, and unapologetically real, just like him. The news hit hard across Hollywood. Fans, co-stars, and filmmakers alike mourned not only the man, but everything he represented: authenticity, integrity, and unfiltered truth. Marvin had lived with the same intensity he brought to every role, and that honesty made him unforgettable both on and off the screen. In his final writings, Marvin didn't hold back. He peeled away the glossy surface of old Hollywood, exposing its secrets, rivalries, and untold pains. He even spoke openly about Cary Grant, diving into the mysteries behind Grant's private life, his struggles with loneliness, and the immense pressure of living as a symbol of perfection. Marvin didn't write to judge. He wrote to show the truth behind the curtain. His words reminded the world that even legends like Grant carried heavy shadows behind their fame. Through Marvin's eyes, we saw that Hollywood's golden age, as glamorous as it looked, was also a world full of contradictions, heartbreaks, and secrets people were too afraid to speak about. His courage to tell those stories made him one of the last true truth-tellers of that era. So what do you think about the lives of these two Hollywood icons, Lee Marvin and Cary Grant? Were they victims of fame or masters of their own myth? Share your thoughts in the comments below. And if you love uncovering hidden stories and forgotten Hollywood legends, make sure to like, subscribe, and share this video.